Waiting for one other person to come here, but we'll go ahead and kick it off. So I'm Rachel West. So I'm the Director of Business Development at RevTech Ventures. So we are a retail technology venture capital firm. So we invest in different retail technologies and concepts that help the retail industry adapt in the age of Amazon. And we are headquartered in Dallas, Texas. So really excited to have joining us today Pearson Gaines, who is the founder of Pressed Roots, which is a dry bar concept for women with textured hair. We have Matt Alexander of Neighborhood Goods, which showcases different digitally native brands and interesting brands and features them, and then also gives them data on how customers are interacting with these brands and other things as well. And then we're going to have Jason Adams from VibeFive joining us in a little bit too. And so they're a really interesting workout concept. So it's like a HIIT workout meets yoga studio. So excited to chat with all of you guys on how you thought about starting your concepts and then what you're thinking about moving forward. So with that, I'll let you each give a little overview of yourselves. So we'll go Matthew and Pearson, and then hopefully we'll be able to have our third join on as well.
Sure. So my name is Matt Alexander. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Neighborhood Goods. You know, as Rachel shared, we describe ourselves as being sort of a new type of department store of sorts. So our first one opened in November 2018 in Plano. And we've since opened two more, one in New York and one in Austin. We launched with about 25 brands working with us back in 2018. And now we have sort of approaching somewhere between 125 and 150 brands working with us today, in addition to our own restaurant concepts and a few other bits and pieces. And so that's really the high level for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. Pearson, what about you?
Hi, everyone. I'm Pearson Gaines. I'm the founder and CEO of Pressed Roots Silk Blowout Bar. Pressed Roots, as Rachel described earlier, is an express luxury salon experience for women with highly textured hair. So if you know about the dry bar concept or the blow dry bar concept, it's essentially that, but our specialization is for women with highly textured hair. The problem is that a lot of those salon concepts don't really cater their services to this demographic. And so we are solving that problem. So for the last we started doing pop-up shops to really test the concept and build brand awareness back in 2018. And we did those in different cities across the country, in Boston and Atlanta, and then in Dallas, and they did really well. We attracted the attention of some investors, such as Rachel and RevTech, and we launched our first storefront in Dallas this past March. And we are in the process of looking for another location, our next location in Plano that will be opening next spring, March 2021.
Awesome. Great. Well, I'm excited to dig in. So all of these concepts are actually started in Dallas, which is pretty exciting. And Pearson actually launched her official store during COVID. And it's actually doing what? Sorry, the week before COVID. You had your launch party the week before, right?
Well, so our launch party was on the 11th. We had our soft opening on the 14th, and then we had to shut down on the 16th.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there. So, Pearson, just wanted to start with the basics, but you pretty much started this concept because you lost your hair twice in salons. So can you tell a little bit more about that and what prompted you to start this?
Yeah. So I have had a rough time finding quality hair care throughout my entire life. As Rachel mentioned, I actually lost my hair on two separate occasions at the hands of licensed stylists. And I always just thought it was something that happened to me. My mom also had lost her hair with salons. I just thought our hair was just fine and just brittle and that just happened to us. And so I was always hyper aware of who I let touch my hair, what salons I went to, just because I'd had such bad experiences. And then, so that being said, as someone who, I was born in Dallas, grew up in the Bay Area, San Francisco, moved to New York for college, and moved to Boston for grad school. So I moved around quite a bit. And so it was always like I was starting from scratch to find a place to get my hair done. And then when I got to Boston, I was on the hunt looking for a place to get my hair done. And I kept on hearing about blowout bars and blow dry bars and dry bars. And I was like, I am not going to a dry bar. Like, I've never seen someone come out of that salon that looks like me. I don't really see a lot of stylists in there that have hair like mine. I got burned by people with hair like mine. So I know these people don't know what to do with my hair. And, you know, I really, and that's really the thought process that a lot of people with textured have when it comes to these national brands. And so I ended up finding someone who knew what they were doing, and I tested out the concept, and I was just blown away by the experience. I had never had an experience like that in my life. And so I got hooked on it. I started going every single week with that one specific stylist, and then she moved away, and I tried someone else and it didn't work. And that's when the light bulb went off, and I was like, you know what, this would be an amazing concept if all of these stylists knew what they were doing with textured hair, just because this demographic spends so much money and so much time on their hair. They're a recurring customer. The way they think about their hair is completely different than the demographic that Dry Bar is serving. And that's when I started testing the concept and with pop-up shops, and they did really well. And yeah, that was really the genesis. It was really from a personal problem that I had, and I learned about a solution that wasn't currently for me, and just kind of put a twist on the current solution.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so now, Matt, you got your big break in Concrete Decor magazine, I heard. So, you know, what did that, can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, we've been fortunate to get, you know, a good amount of sort of press over the years, largely very little to do with us, and more to do with, I think, just general excitement for this general type of concept, I think. And the one exception to that was very much to do with us was an article in Concrete Decor magazine that was about the concrete sort of technique we deployed in Plano, which I know nothing about. But, you know, the opening line was something, you know, to the tune of, you know, what does, you know, retail, Serena Williams and Reese Witherspoon have in common? And apparently the answer is us, which seems like a very flimsy link at best, but here we are.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Keep going.
No, I mean, what would you like to know?
Oh, well, I guess if we can do it. So what caused you to launch your concept? Because initially you started as a nonprofit, right?
Well, so yeah, I mean, a lot of the impetus for this idea was an experiment I launched back in 2014. So it's based here in Dallas, called Unbranded. I started with another local entrepreneur, Brian DeLuca. He was running Foot Cardigan at the time, which was doing fantastically well. For my company at the time, we had just done a pop-up during New York Fashion Week. So it would have been right around this sort of time, you know, 6 years ago. And we had sort of seen this like great sort of response, and I sort of came back to Dallas sort of wondering why I hadn't seen more in the way of pop-ups in the city. And Brian and I sort of were catching up for lunch and quickly sort of snowballed into this idea of, you know, what would it look like if we opened up communal space for free to provide space to local entrepreneurs, makers, designers, what have you. And so we went around looking, you know, for different landlords that might be willing to sort of entertain that sort of concept. And very few people knew what a pop-up was at the time. And so it was a really uphill battle. Ultimately, we found Scott Rawman, who was redeveloping a lot of Deep Ellum at the time, and he gave us a space there. And we got some local companies like SoftLayer to help, you know, fund the lease, in addition to companies like MailChimp and a few others. And we brought in all sorts of brands, and some of those brands have gone on to become really massive now. And so it's anything from like the Citizenry to Mizzen and Main, Ministry of Supply came in from across the country, and all manner of others. Common Desk did a co-working pop-up there. Tweed Coffee came in. It was a prelude to Houndstooth opening here in town. That's their sort of in-house coffee line they were experimenting with at the time. And so it just sort of proved that we ran it for 6 weeks, different theme every week. So different brands would be there sort of a week at a time. We'd only be open certain days of the week. You had to staff yourself. And it showed that you could get a lot of people to really come in and really care about these sorts of things if you gave them a really good reason to come into a physical space in the first place. And so it was just a much different relationship and format of space than what you would find typically in your sort of holiday shopping routine. And so it was just, a random sort of, we threw it together from idea to opening within 4 weeks. And it just happened to really resonate. And so years later, I had always been thinking about what a more permanent version of that may look like. And I met my co-founder on this project, a guy called Mark Macinta, who very, very accomplished and successful in the world of commercial real estate. And he was sort of riffing on what this sort of idea could look like. He had helped develop the food hall at one end of Legacy West in Plano and was hoping to have something spiritually similar bookend the opposite sort of entrance. So that way it could have these sort of communal concepts at either end. And he was interested in whether or not there would be a permanent version of Unbranded that made sense. And, we met up for what was meant to be an hour-long lunch and quickly became several. And he just felt very strongly that this sort of idea ought to exist. He didn't really want to run it, but he felt very strongly that he could help with the genesis of it. And so, for me at the same time, I'd had experience with it, had a perspective around what to do differently if you were doing it for more of a for-profit model to suit larger brands, and also to sort of what it could look like if you put some money into it and developed a model a little bit differently to sort of be able to pay people appropriately and otherwise. And so we sort of ran along from there. And so the company was incorporated it was last night, in fact, it's like a month ago today, it turned 3 years old. And so I was the only person on the team for the first year or thereabouts. And we went on to raise some capital, go and open the first location and sort of run along from there.
That's awesome. Well, also, Jason, I'm glad to have you on the panel as well. So a little bit of an intro on Jason. So we know his co-founder very well, who's really involved in RevTech. So when Mike told us about this concept and Jason, I was really excited to learn about it and thought they'd be a perfect fit. So they have a concept called VibeFive, and it's a really interesting concept. It's like it uses infrared technology to do like a HIIT and yoga workout combo. So a lot of things going on there, and I'm gunning for them to open also close to me. So they're up north Texas right now, but hopefully they'll open in Uptown at some point. So Jason, I'll let you give a little bit of an intro about yourself, and then also know you got your big break through a Super Bowl player. So I want to learn more about how you launched that concept as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's an exciting concept. We really had just focused in on the marketplace itself of what was missing, and we've just combined. We were focused on unit economics. You spoke about Mike. He was a big player in Fossil, went on with Signa Jewelers and then Francesca's. So really understood retail. So we really focused in on unit economics. But so we combined a lot of different modalities. We decided to pull in and blend this concept with yoga, strength, cardio, flexibility, and meditation, all happening in 50 minutes under infrared heat. And we decided to kind of put this in a really everybody's goal oriented about fitness in the sense of weight loss or strength or body change and stuff. And we're really took the platform of, let's feel better. So really kind of the feel better platform. And so we know the values of infrared. And it's just exciting that you get to go on this 50-minute, and we call it a journey, because you get to kind of travel through this myriad of intensity and serenity and everything in between in 50 minutes. So ending with a cold towel and meditation at the very end. So it's fun, and we like the concept, but it was good. Yes, real quickly about how we got into it. We really approached it very intentionally. I run a group called the Athlete Group, which is just kind of high net individuals that look at investing with pro athletes investing. And a buddy of mine that was with the Dallas Cowboys, won 3 Super Bowls, had just said, "Hey, have we looked at the fitness space, because it was on a big rise as everybody was, and what was missing in it?" So we really set out to be very intentional about, could we build a concept that could massively scale. And so that's what we did. So we just opened up our very first one in Frisco. We're about a month old into this, and so far we're hitting the numbers that we kind of projected we would, even in a BC, a post-COVID kind of world. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. And where do you get the concept idea from?
Yeah, so the concept really did initially come from we looked at a studio that had 2 studios in it. That was a fitness studio in one and a yoga studio in the other side, and we wanted to see if that could scale. That realizing that ultimately what we got was individuals that liked yoga and would go to yoga, and individuals that would like fitness and go to fitness, and they weren't really cross-pollinating. And that was very hard on the unit economics. It was very hard on scalability. So we kind of stepped back and took a chance and just said, let's develop one format and build that. And we beta tested it for a year, and it did very well received. And we modeled the model itself was modeled somewhat similar to an Orange Theory. And I say modeled in just the sense it says one class that changes every day, and that you never get to see that same workout, but the format, structure, and the journey is similar. And I think our unit economics are probably a little better, but we'll see.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Pearson, coming from, or at least for me, coming from the investing world, I know a lot of Texas VCs are pretty focused on enterprise SaaS, especially in this region. So can you talk about how you're effective in communicating with different investors to actually gain investment, and how you overcame those barriers that, holds a lot of other entrepreneurs back, but you were able to break through?
Sure. I would say what enabled us to raise money was really our proof of concept. We had been testing everything about the concept for over 2 years through pop-up shops. So we were able to make really great projections that we were able to back up with our data from our pop-up shop. So we tested everything about the concept from, the press roots method, that is our signature method, like our secret sauce. We were testing that. We were testing, how we were going to be paying our stylists. We were testing what is the price point that people will pay for this service? How often will they be coming back? And so we were able to really model this out, and we had so much data that supported that this is not only a need, but this business will make money, and every salon location that we have will be just a cash cow. That, the proof was in the pudding. And so, in all that data, just like these other 2 gentlemen that are on the panel have said, even during COVID, when, this industry particularly is so, people aren't wanting to be in person getting their hair done, and we're operating at 25% capacity. And we're still making, we're right in line with our projections of what we would be making if we were at that. So for an investor to invest in this, it was like a smart decision because they saw all the data for the last 2 years.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, and I can attest to it being compelling, because we ended up investing in Pearson, and it was a great decision. So Jason, you have a really interesting, really effective unit economic model, which we don't always get to see that. So can you explain how your unit economics work, and how did you think about it for that first store, in an industry that's seemingly saturated, and doing that, but then also being able to establish a moat in this sector as well?
Yeah, so the unit economics, we obviously started there. We studied a lot of different unit economics, Orange Theory, for example, the fact that they're about 3,000 square feet. They run at optimal capacity of about 900 members with about 22 people per session. They have about 8 sessions a day which gives you about a 37.5 factor. Anyway, I'm going through all this, but it basically dividing those ratios of where your capacity could be at. And what we did was we decided that we would kind of see if we could look at those same numbers, but we wanted our square footage to be much smaller. So we went with 1,650 square feet. We can go a little bit farther than that. And we know that our build out is about 350,000. And then based on taking a 35 factor, which is 8 classes, 20 people in that, we're projected to do 815,000 in gross revenue with a membership of, between 4 and 450. And that gives us incredibly solid numbers. And so we really kind of heavily backed in. So if we stay on track, we know a single unit will return us our investment within 15 months. And then after that, we'll net somewhere between 280 to 320. And then we just keep doing this over and over. And so there's a lot of other processes and systems that we kind of really took approach at. But with the primary thing being experiential, from when you walk in the store that you can kind of see behind us, that just flows right into this studio that, from very sensory oriented. We do it in bare feet, and we have, Terraflex floor, so it's a little soft when you feel it with infrared coming down, and we generate some smells, and it just, again, very experiential. So to kind of continue to drive those numbers. So yeah, but it was very again, because our thought was, if you can do it at once really well, we can just continue to replicate that. So that's how we looked at it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So kind of bottom line, small store space to maximize output. Is that correct?
It is, and it was fun. Yeah. If you come in, it does not feel like 1,650 square feet, but it absolutely is. It's half of that is optimized for our studio space, and what's great is, even with those numbers, we cut down with distance, and we still can run. We can still run incredibly a solid business even at the half capacity that we're running, so, or the significantly reduced capacity that we're running. So, but it's great. Yeah, I think that's the thing, is if to not lose sight that unit economics have to come into this, especially if you're some sort of retail. I mean, at some point you've got to know. My partner in this, he was pushing up a very similar size store. He was doing over 80 of them a year with very similar, 1,600 square feet, same unit economics. So again, we got to learn a lot from him as well during this. So
that's awesome. And Matt, just with all of the recent change, what have those conversations with brands looked like? Would love to learn what the mentality is like this in the current environment as it pertains to retail, online or offline, and would just love to learn about how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, I mean, look, we closed down quite similar to Pearson. We had just opened our Austin location on March 13th, and we closed all of our stores on March 14th or thereabouts. And so, we are predominantly, or were a predominantly offline business. So, each of our locations has a different mix of brands. The core sort of premise of our model from the early days was that, for direct consumer digitally native brands, that customer acquisition cost was rising quite significantly online. Everyone pursuing the same customer, sort of pursuing the same exact demographic, the same channels for advertising, and often pursuing a very similar product type. And so the result was that, for all of them, they were seeing unsustainable pathway from an advertising perspective in terms of developing a profitable business. And then secondarily, losing, most critically, real loyalty over time. And so physical retail is seen as a salve to that. So if you're able to get into physical retail, for many direct-to-consumer digitally native brands that you think of, most of their revenue and profitability now stems from the physical world. So Warby Parker, Peloton, otherwise, right? And so physical, if you think of it a little bit differently, it can be incredibly productive, whether that's in terms of marketing, sales, data, otherwise, right? it can be often much less expensive to have a physical retail store than it is to even have a billboard in a particularly populated area. And so if you can have something that has that much more of a chance where you can have a positive interaction with someone, it doesn't necessarily matter if there's a transaction right there in that moment, but it creates something that can be quite sticky and quite positive. And so as you think about brands, it's sort of an interesting dynamic where heading into this period, they were all sort of scrambling in many respects to really think about profitability. There's been a big conversation around that in the direct-to-consumer space. Haven't been a huge amount of exits or that many companies in the space going public in recent years. So everyone's thinking about sustainability, thinking about unit economics, thinking about the core fundamentals of running a healthy business, which shouldn't be something that happens years into the business, but here we are. And so for a lot of them, they were sort of very much on this path where they're contemplating stores, they're doing pop-ups, they're starting to diversify their revenue channels, whether it's wholesale or otherwise. With us, we were allowing them into the space so they can do everything that Pearson shared earlier, which is test a concept, get into a given market, capture a huge amount of data, sell product, generate revenue. And so for them, by stark contrast to a lot of the pop-ups they've run on their own, they have a huge sort of return in terms of data, insight, and otherwise. You think about this climate. So obviously the physical world predominantly shut down from sort of a non-essential perspective in mid-March. What happened in song with that is that consumer spending went online from a discretionary perspective. And with these brands then, they've seen, real opportunity there, but the byproduct of it is that no one's been able to be advertising at the moment. Their budgets have been locked up. One of the first things that typically goes is marketing. So they have this sort of huge opportunity where there's all these people that are predominantly shopping online for months at a time, but at the same time, they can't necessarily go in and acquire them. And at the same time, it's still the fundamental problems of sort of competing in relatively crowded spaces. And then you throw in all sorts of other sort of socio-political, economic concerns that come along with a pandemic and the general byproduct it has on health, well-being, employment, and otherwise. And it throws everyone into a bit of a spin. And so for many brands, the sort of shutdown, we all sort of closed. I mean, like Pearson and I, we closed our spaces largely around the same time. We didn't coordinate that, right? But everyone did it largely around the same time. What happened in the sort of intervening months was, I think a lot of brands and people started talking more to each other about how they would reopen, how they would think about business in an ongoing pandemic and eventually post, right? And so one was thinking about the core civic duty of prioritizing safety above all else. Second was making sure that that was deployed specifically towards employees and team members, as well as the consumer. And third was thinking about the general sort of dynamic. And so it was this very sort of, the dynamic in those conversations in the early days was very sort of unknown, apprehensive, confused. What you found sort of as you got deeper into it was people in like some brands, to sort of back up, were hit unevenly by this. So I know like home furnishing brands that are doing the best they've ever done, other home furnishing brands that are shutting down, right? And so it hit very unevenly. And so you have sort of very different conversations there. But people were seeing some success, were starting to talk in very hushed tones about what opportunity may look like looking ahead, which is one of those sort of things, it's a little paradoxical, right? Because you're sort of talking about the survival of your business, but you also need to be thinking about the future. And today, the real fundamental sort of prevailing conversation is around now about more how you can thrive going forward, not just sort of be in this purely reactionary, sort of very defensive position. And so it's been interesting. We've seen some brands, that had done poorly during this, that have sort of been adapting and pivoting. We've equally seen others that have just been thriving, and they're thinking more about how they can sort of accelerate a little bit. And so for us, we had all sorts of sort of worst case sort of scenario planning, thinking otherwise. A lot of our business moved online while we were closed, but still, it's not sort of to rival the fact that we have 3 large-scale stores with a huge wealth of brands and products, our own restaurants and otherwise. but still doing very well by comparison to where we had been, and starting to certainly rival, if not exceed, what we had been doing a year prior, right? And so what we had expected along with that was that we would lose some brands. We also sort of around the same time were thinking about how we could be supporting brands that were struggling, brands and individuals. And so we started to really invest time in initiatives that we could deploy to be supportive in communal areas. And the funny thing was, sort of fast forward to now, so we've been open now in Texas for 2 and a bit months, in New York for almost a month precisely. And we're seeing the stores in Texas perform as they largely would in sort of a normal year. They're performing really, really well. We didn't lose any brands while we were closed. And instead, we've actually picked up a lot. And, I think what we've seen in the retail industry, this is hardly a unique or nuanced or new point. A lot of people have made this before me, but the pandemic has been an accelerant for a lot of prevailing problems in the industry at large. So JCPenney, Neiman's locally struggling, but they were already struggling and they were already heading in a problematic direction. It was just accelerated in this. What's come with that is that the benefits of our model and what we do with brands, and certainly not just for us, but how certain other brands operate to speak more to what consumer demand looks like today rather than what it looked like 30 or 40 years ago. They're reaping rewards and starting to look ahead in a more positive light. So, we're still in this, obviously, for an indefinite amount of time from this point, and things are obviously looking better in Dallas in particular at the moment, which is great. But the ultimate reality now is less about the sort of chaos of the response at the time, and it's more about now the coordinated consideration of how we can all sort of move forward in the most positive way. And I don't have all the answers towards that, but what I would tell you is that from talking to a lot of brands, and we talk to a lot of brands, it's the conversation's shifting and it's starting to look a little bit more opportunistically and more positively ahead. But as I say, it's early days. You never know what's going to happen in 15 minutes at this point versus what's going to happen, 2 weeks from now. And so, I mean, for us, we find ourselves in a good and positive and exciting position, and so we feel cautiously optimistic. But it can change quickly, and so you just have to sort of remain nimble.
Yeah, that makes sense. And this question's for all of you guys. So you're all in different processes on scaling Pearson. You're just pretty much wrapping up perfecting the business model of your first store. Matt, you've launched a few. Jason, I think y'all are in the process of launching a few as well. So how do you guys know when it's time to scale and go from that 1 store to 2 stores, and then from those 2 stores to many stores? How do you guys think about that? Who wants to go first? No one got, no, all people shouldn't go at once.
I can jump on it quickly. I mean, for us, it was the plan from the very beginning, right? So I don't have, my answer's a cop-out. We had always planned for scale. So each neighborhood goods is quite distinct and different. And so we think about locations differently, right? So traditional department store, it has a certain aspect of utility to it. So you go to Nordstrom, Neiman's, whatever it is, and it has largely the same merchandise and mix in each given market. That means that if I'm visiting a new city or a new place, I don't necessarily have a massive compulsion to go to one of those stores, just because it's largely the same as where I've come from, right? What was important for us from the very beginning was that in as much as we wanted to develop an ecosystem of spaces, we had to speak to different groups, we had to speak to different brands, we had to speak to different goal sets on behalf of those brands. And so each of our locations, think of them less as names and think of them more as different feature sets to befit different goals on behalf of different brands. And so it's just always been baked into the concept from the beginning. Now, we obviously wouldn't have just run along and expanded if things weren't looking good. But what I would tell you is that the fundamentals of it, for us, always from the beginning, were steeped in the feeling. We've heard it come up a few times on this panel already. But for us, a lot of people talk about, in our world, sort of experiential retail with the sort of capital E, and it sort of entails ball pits and trampolines and whatever else, and it's this very sort of flash in the pan relationship with the consumer. we wanted to create something more perennial and more sort of lowercase e experiential, which is to say just really memorable and positive. And so the constituent components of our business, whether it's the technology, the economics, the F&B, our private label initiatives and otherwise, all of them can be quantified and looked at in a very thoughtful way from a business perspective. But what's most important is the sum total of all of those parts and how it feels to the consumer, right? And so looking at things like dwell time, looking at things like repeat purchase rate, looking at things like brand retention and general pipeline, getting a sense for how that was sort of trending and what that was looking like and what the feedback of the world was going to be for this sort of concept that was broad and unorthodox was the most important thing for us. And so, you know, we had sworn up and down, I literally, like a month after we opened our first location in Plano, I was on Bloomberg, and the interviewer, she asked me if we would be opening in New York anytime soon, and this was being recorded in the studio in New York. And I said, oh, absolutely not. We're definitely not going to New York anytime soon, not for at least 2-3 years. And literally later that day, we were presented with this opportunity at Chelsea Market. And so we took it, and that became our second location. And so like for us, like it's more to say that we've had plans from the beginning. We were always going to expand, but like what was important was making sure that it resonated. And so like the economics, yes, like, but it's also easy to get, not necessarily easy. The economics can be misleading. You can have this moment where you pop and launch and a lot of people are really excited. But what fundamentally matters, especially with us, is whether or not people care and whether or not it resonates with them and whether or not it remains relevant for them. Relevance is the most important aspect of the currency in which we trade, right? And so that's where we had to focus. And so, you know, now as we think about more expansion, new locations, we find ourselves in that sort of nimble, opportunistic position we were when New York came around, where the real estate world is rife with opportunity right now. And for us, it's now very much about how we look at that. So for us now, it's obviously a strange time to sort of go and sign leases for a bunch more physical retail locations, but it's also a very interesting time to do it because you have a lot of leverage and it's better economics. And so for us, it's a balance of, yes, like understanding the model, but more than that, it's about sort of having a sense of where you want to go and why, and making sure that you feel confident in who you are, what you're doing, and what that means. And of course, your ability to be nimble as you go, because plans are plans. A lot of them are going to break. You know, it's going to be more about what you can do to be responsive and carve your own path as you go.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I know we have 5 minutes left, so I also want to ask just a fun question, but what's next for all of you guys? Are any of you launching new products, launching, you know, another store, you know, doing something fun with marketing? What's new for each of you? So we'll go Pearson, Jason, Matt.
Yes, we are scoping out our next location that will be launching in Plano. And just to piggyback off what Matt just said, this was always in the plan for us. Our mission is to make quality hair care easy and accessible for all women to achieve. And so scale was always, this was never just going to be a one store thing, because we all over the country and all over the world have access to quality hair care. So yes, we're planning to go to Plano. Hopefully that store will be opening beginning of next March. And then we are also, we just started retailing Moroccan oil products here, and we are looking to partner to do our own line of products. So we're actually working through that right now. So that might be coming in the next couple months, Rachel. We need to catch up.
Yeah, we do. Awesome. Well, that's awesome. Jason, what about you?
Yeah, we're excited. We're hitting the numbers that we thought. Obviously, in a something like this, speed to market is the case. So we're kind of on a nice capital raise here. We've got some interest in international already. There's some but again, I think our strategy is we'll pop up 2 more locations here, hopefully by January. Then double down and then do what's called potting up. We'll pick a couple different locations across the United States and put down 5 in those places. So Florida, Colorado, a few of these other places. So that'll be it. So we'll be on a capital raise. So
awesome. Matt, what about you?
I mean, we've got lots going on at the moment. We have been investing heavily in our private label line, a little bit like Pearson's talking about. So like we did it as an experiment in the early days. We came out with like sweatshirts with smiley faces on them, which is one of our marks. And it's one of those things where like I was starting to get like selfies from all sorts of people in the retail industry and otherwise sending me pictures like before they went to bed wearing our sweatshirts at night. And we started to sort of sense this moment and opportunity around it. And so we released a line of t-shirts, things like that when we opened our store in Chelsea. And it did just disproportionately well. And so we're launching new products there all the time and starting to really lean into collaborations and exclusives with the brands we work with. You know, the other piece to it on the brand front is that as we see larger, more incumbent retailers stumble, it presents opportunity for us from a business perspective, right? Where we've historically predominantly worked with direct-to-consumer digitally native brands and some local, more sort of independent brands as well. But now, and we've done it before, but now in particular, we're starting to hear from a huge amount of very large scale names. And so for us, it's about maintaining the curatorial approach, whilst also sort of getting experimental there. And then, yeah, definitely, in addition to all of that, looking at expansion, you know, I think Austin opened in sort of such strange circumstances, but it's doing very, very well. You know, all of our stores still have limited capacity. We're just about to launch our restaurant in New York, sort of belatedly. There's a lot of these other things that we're really just getting around to. And so there's a huge amount for us to do with the 3 we already have. And because those spaces are changing all the time, it keeps it very fresh and exciting. But as I mentioned, you know, we are sort of pursuing the development of an ecosystem that serves different goals. And so that requires getting into some different areas in which, you know, we don't currently have a presence. And so we're looking at expansion very selectively, opportunistically, and cautiously, of course. But yeah, lots of fun stuff. I mean, our new app is relaunching in the next couple of weeks. There's stuff coming all the time.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, that's so exciting. Well, thanks everyone for taking time to join and speak on this panel. And thanks everyone for joining. So it's been super exciting to just learn more and talk about it. And, you know, for those of you that are launching new concepts, we love learning about them. So we were one of the first investors in Matt and in Pearson. And Jason actually did an unconventional funding route. So he didn't go the venture route, or we would have wanted in. So always feel free to shoot me your deck and just find me on LinkedIn. And I put the websites of Matt, Pearson, and Jason's concepts if anyone wants to check them out. And thanks everyone for joining, and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.